and Europeans want an army. But who's going to deliver? So we asked Europeans, and they said 70% of them said that they want a European army, although only 18% of them said that they would personally join. Now, that's a real trench. However, mandatory army service is on the rise. 66% of Europeans now claim it. However, it's being pulled by baby boomers, which, of course, they would not be called to arms with conscription. That's a surprise. In any case, 86% of Europeans want strategic autonomy when it comes to defense. But are Europeans willing to foot the bill? Well, it's complicated. Roughly a third of them say that Europe is spending enough, and another third say that we're not spending enough. But you know that Europe's enough is not quite NATO's enough. And speaking of NATO, how's NATO doing? How's the Article 5? Well, it seems to be fine in the eyes of the Europeans because 75% of Europeans say that they would defend a NATO ally, although they would rather defend an EU member. The EU outperforms NATO in almost every country, especially in countries like Italy or Spain. And maybe this is something to do. It seems that the Iran war is not the Europeans' war, because 66% of Europeans disapprove of it, especially in countries like, no surprise again, Italy, Belgium, or Spain. But if Iran's war is not the Europeans' war, I guess the Ukraine war is. And is there war fatigue? Maybe. There's a three-way split. Roughly a third of Europeans say that we have helped Ukraine too much. And this is one of the funniest questions in the entire poll because in this one, the far right and the far left go hand in hand. Roughly another third say that we have helped just enough, and roughly the other third say that we could do more, especially in countries like Germany or Spain, which, as a Spaniard, makes me hopeful and proud, up in the 40s. So, if you found that interesting, you can read about the entire report on the defense section on the website, and of course we're going to hear more about it now in the defense panel, led by Politico reporter Jan Chisky. So Jan, over to you.
Thanks, Mark, very much for sharing those poll results with us. My name is Jan Chisky. I'm a senior policy editor and in charge of defense policy as well as mobility policy earlier this morning. And we're going to dig into the future of European security in a changing geopolitical climate in this panel. We have Javi Lopez, the Vice President of the European Parliament, Vsevolod Chentsov, who's the head of the Ukrainian mission to the European Union, Camille Grand, who is the Secretary General of the European Aerospace Security and Defense Industries Association, and Martin Sklenar, who's the former Defense Minister of Slovakia, and he's also a distinguished fellow with the Future of Security program at Globsec in Prague. Thanks very much. And we also, thanks for the interview with Andris Kubilius, the Defense Commissioner, who's become something of a friend of the show. I think we talked to him 2 weeks ago, so he's waiting for his political accreditation to come through. I'd like to start with one of the poll results that really kind of jumped out at me was, and we've seen this elsewhere as well, that a growing number of Europeans see the US not as an ally, but as a threat or a competitor. And this comes at a time where the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has just been in Washington Donald Trump was railing at NATO, denouncing the disloyal allies who aren't helping him. There's talk of the US shifting forces in Europe, potentially of even thinking about withdrawing from NATO. And I'd like to maybe get a sense from the panel, what's your read of the state of the transatlantic relationship and where America is? Is America an ally? Javi, maybe I'll start with you.
Unfortunately, I would say now the current administration is not acting as an ally. I think the people is quite smart, recognizing what is happening in Washington. And the reality is now Trump's administration is putting a lot of pressure to our sovereignty, our capacity to decide, pressure to our security, pressure to our democracy. We see now the elections this Sunday. And this
the Hungarian election.
The Hungarian elections. This is what we are seeing. And sometimes I will say people realize the changes that we are living before the politicians. And this is a good poll showing that. We want to have the best possible relations with Washington and with the United States, first. Secondly, we have a long list of rank of areas of cooperation that we can continue working with. Third, the relation that we have during the 20th century has changed forever. And this automatic worldview that we shared during the 20th century probably will not be there anymore.
Between Europe and America.
Between Europe and America. And this means we have to de-risk. This means that we have to reduce dependencies, and especially dependencies coming from security. The wars are more critical, but not only. Also in digital, technology, innovation. This is the reality, and we have to adapt to this new reality.
Thanks. Camille, you've both been in NATO, and now you're with the ASD. What's your sense of the relationship? Is the tone out of Europe overwrought, that people are seizing on some of this is the view that she gets from Washington? It's like, cool it Europe. This is just Trump blowing off steam, but the fundamental relationship is just fine? Or is there something that's seriously wrong that we need to rethink the security architecture?
Well, Jan, as you mentioned, I happen to have been at NATO during the entire first Trump term in the senior leadership. And in that environment, I think at that time it was fair to say, don't pay attention to the tweets or the comments and focus on the policies, because there was not much change. I would argue that we are in a different situation now. First of all, because we have a multiplications of crises or shocks that point at the diverse views across the Atlantic. Of course, tariffs, a serious debate over Ukraine. The Europeans are extremely frustrated of the direction and the push for the negotiation in Ukraine and the way it's been handled without proper consultation. You add to that the Greenland episode.
Greenland seems to have really been a thing that kind of broke Europe's back, in a sense.
I think for a number of countries it was very much indeed a sort of tilting moment. And then if you add to that the issue of Iran and the renewed threats to withdraw from NATO, even if it's going to be extraordinarily complicated to implement, I think we are indeed in another era. Meaning in an era where the nature of the relationship is likely to evolve profoundly. Most Europeans, and I think all Europeans, prefer to be allies with the US and will want to salvage what can be salvaged. But on the other hand, I have to recognize that they have to be much more responsible on the world stage for European security, for the defense of Europe, as they've become much more responsible for supporting Ukraine in the past year.
Martin, you also overlapped with the first Trump administration when you were the defense minister in Slovakia. Do you concur? I mean, is there something? Does Europe just need to be much more cut and dry about the relationship with the U.S., that it needs to do more to stand on its own?
Europe needs to find a way, Jan, how to deal with the new U.S., right? Because if the question is U.S. an ally, I would say yes, but a very different ally than what we were used to. So Europe has to find a way how to deal with this new situation. If I just oversimplify it for the sake of making a point here, The relationship used to be, and the profound basis of the relationship for the past 2 decades at least was Europe should do more on defense and security on its own, and the US will not be there all the time to provide everything that is necessary. And the Europeans said, yeah, you know, I mean, we're doing here, we're doing there. We just did enough so that the US would, you know, come at peace with it and then say, okay, you're done enough, and then next time we'll come back to that situation or to that discussion again. But that has changed now. What the US expects from Europe is coming up with ambition, coming up with a plan, coming up with an understanding how to deal with the situations. And yes, I think they would be ready to help Europe deliver on things, right? If Europe came to the US and said, this is how we want to structure the European defense, this is what we need from you, Mr. President, please provide these strategic enablers, it's another kind of discussion than what we are used to. And the Europeans don't know how to talk to the US this way, right? Because it was always the biggest ally and the leader in NATO.
Although I guess you could see Trump is again threatening Greenland now in the last couple of days. So you sort of wonder, to return to the question, is this an ally? I'm Canadian as well. I had a visit from some Canadian friends a week ago, and I haven't been in Canada for a while, but I was astonished at how viscerally anti-American they are. These are conservative guys, and they were like, would not go into an American car dealership, would never travel to the States. It's something fundamental has shifted. I'd like to ask Vsevolod, I asked you last because you're in a slightly different position, and it's a more delicate question for you. Would you say that America is Ukraine's ally?
Well, indeed, we are in a quite special position,
Yeah.
because we are fighting Russian aggression, and indeed, America is an ally for Ukraine.
They don't give you any humanitarian or military aid.
But still, Donald Trump is leading the peace efforts, and
Okay.
EU and member states, they're playing their role, and we still rely on US help on air defense, and it's critical for us. What we managed to do is to develop a Ukrainian drone domain, and not only, to develop so-called kill zone, and we really advancing in that regard. And we are building stronger cooperation with our European allies. So we are in a very difficult situation, because we cannot project how we're going to do it tomorrow, because we need this support from both sides now, on one hand. On the other hand, Ukraine can also deliver and help both US, and we faced the situation in the Gulf quite recently, and Ukraine was ready and indeed helped sending its experts and instructors to help, and also to help European partners to redevelop their industrial base using Ukrainian experience how to fight Russia, how to contain Russia.
I was really struck by that, where in the early years of the war, Ukraine was more of a security taker. It needed help. It would not have survived on its own. It needed external assistance. You're now shifting to being more of a security giver, which is Zelensky's deals that he's signed in the Gulf. He was talking just a day or two ago about a new security architecture for Europe, where Ukraine would play a pivotal role, I guess, together with Turkey and the UK, as a broader European structure. So how important are the tech advances that you've made in being able to offer assistance, and the battlefield experience that you have in being able to offer concrete assistance to European allies?
Well, I think it's quite realistic, and the Ukrainian experience is actually valued by the European industry, by the governments, because our products, they are battle tested, and it's a new type of war. And unfortunately, it's only Ukraine and Russia today, they know how to fight this war, so on one hand. But on the other hand, if we unite our forces with Europe, because we are talking about the immense technological possibilities which European companies have, and also the speed of the Ukrainian innovators, also financial resources which Europe can bring, and also Gulf countries, and I think they will be ready to contribute. So if we put this together, we will be really capable to counter any Russian aggression.
So there's a synergy there that
Exactly.
you can work out. I was struck. I saw a video clip of I think it was a British training exercise where they had this tank rolling through and a squad of men running behind the tank. And I was like, and everybody was saying, if that happened in Ukraine, the tank would be blown up almost immediately, and all those guys would be hit by drones, and in 5 minutes that would be the end of that whole detachment. So just a different way of fighting. Camille, do you see the value that Ukraine brings to the European defense industry? Is that something that your members understand, or are they still sort of stuck in sort of an old way of thinking where they're developing tech and equipment for a war that's not the war that's being fought right now in Ukraine?
I think many of them are adapting and are adapting quite fast, often in partnership with Ukrainian colleagues. There are a number of European companies that have invested in the relationship with the Ukrainian companies and have a presence in Ukraine and have very close ties. And I think this is being more structured than it was in the even 2 years ago. So I think we're moving into that direction. I think of course you want to look at different domains. Obviously in the domain of drone warfare, there is an enormous set of lessons to be learned. The establishment of something that really did change warfare. I remember not so long ago being lectured by a senior NATO general who said, the last 200 meters haven't changed much since Waterloo. That is no longer true, precisely for the kill zone that the ambassador was referring to, and the fact that now the battlefield has become much more transparent. So our industry needs to adapt to that, to offer solutions. Some of them are very guided by the Ukrainian experience. Others might be more driven by some of the tech experience that pre-existed and that needs to be pushed further.
Well, we had that quote, the unfortunate quote from the head of Rheinmetall, who was talking about Ukrainian housewives building drones, which he got sort of smacked down pretty hard for.
I think it was unfair to housewives, Ukraine, and a few others. But the point, and the colleagues from Rheinmetall sort of corrected it afterwards. But the interesting thing is that indeed there is a novel way of warfare. There's a novel way to do industry. I think the European industry is adapting relatively fast. It was an industry that had a tradition of being quite cost-effective because it didn't benefit from the sort of large market that your U.S. counterparts had. And now the issue is, how do you insert that experience? How do you insert those lessons into the way we do warfare, which might ultimately be different from what happens in Ukraine, because of course, and that's to their credit, the Ukrainians are fighting in an extraordinarily difficult environment with, for too many years, restrictions to the type of equipment that were delivered by Western partners, that, for instance, didn't allow to use the full scope of air power that European armies would use. But having said this, and it is indeed an era of massive transformation in defense technology, lessons from Ukraine, but also introduction of novel technologies in terms of combat cloud, artificial intelligence, you name it. So we're in a very interesting moment from a defense technology standpoint, and there are companies all over Europe that are adapting to this, some faster than others. But it is quite fascinating, including the emergence of new players that are becoming key partners in this.
Javi, Camille mentioned the need for amalgamation of the European market. Where are we on the Defense Commissioner Kubilius has talked about the need to create a European common market for defense. That seems to be a huge problem, the market fragmentation, each country procuring largely from its own industry, multiple iterations of tanks and fighter jets and rifles and everything else. Is there a role for the European Union to play in trying to sort this out, to make procurement more sensible?
Yeah, completely. And probably, well, the European Union, here we have clear competence to do that. No? Maybe not in other areas of defense, but on industry we have clear competence, and we can do it. The single market is probably our biggest asset, a geopolitical asset, but also we have huge instruments in terms of security. We have been doing a lot during the last 3-4 years. I would say EDIRPA, EDIP, financial instruments saved. We need more cooperation. We need interoperability. We need to use our scale in terms of European size. We can do more. We are spending like more after 3-4 years of Ukrainian war. I would underline the comments made by the, well, now the Ukrainian army probably is the strongest in Europe. And then there, it's not only at stake our security and our freedoms, the basic principles in Ukraine that enable the peaceful coexistence in Europe after 45, also it's at stake the most important army in Europe. No? And, but coming back to the single market and the fragmentation, we need more cooperation, we need to spend obviously more, we are spending more, all of us, also here in Spain, but we need to spend it better. And this means use the European scale, this means better cooperation, this means interoperability, this means things in European capacities, and not double, triple capacities, but also after to have holes in some areas related to this new warfare that we are facing. And we have to spend not only better, we have to spend more European. And this means to reduce our dependencies, obviously coming from outside. And here, the European industry plays a pivotal and key role to ensure our security and our sovereignty.
Although that does sort of run into political issues. You're certainly seeing that in Poland, where the SAFE, which seemed uncontroversial, the 44 billion that the Poles are borrowing from SAFE, ended up creating explosive politics because they were, the government was accused of favoring German and West European industry. Martin, how do you see that? I mean, this is a difficult political issue for countries.
That's exactly
Slovakia
right.
has a big industry. What happens if you amalgamate but you don't get much of a pie, cut of the pie out of that?
That's exactly the point that I wanted to make on this. There seems to be two things going in different directions, right? The defragmentation needs to happen. I mean, the industry is much more fragmented to actually be working in an efficient way to deliver it quickly and at the capacity that we actually need for the time when we need to be ready with all the capabilities and capacities. The bottom-up trend, we already see that, and maybe Camille can confirm or correct me, but we already see the big companies trying to integrate by however you want to call it, the Rheinmetalls, the KNDSs.
I think Spain has lost a lot of its defense industries now owned by Rheinmetall. So.
Right, so that's going on, but then the top-down will never be there because the politics will always interfere and will always look at this as a way to talk about jobs and where do you tax the income. This is going to be so much more important for the region, for the national politicians to overcome, and this is not something that the Commission even can push through, right? So if we have expectations from Kubilius on this, I don't think that we are being fair to him, because this is a very political issue that will need to be solved on among the national government, so in the European Council, not in the European Commission in this sense, right? To make a positive spin out of it, Slovakia is one of the countries that produces most cars per capita than any other country in the world. None of those are Slovak cars. They are all, coming from abroad, but we just produce, the companies own the factories, and the relationship is fine. So it's possible to do this also in defense, I would argue, but it will take a long political sensitive discussion.
So should the Commission ease its competition rules when it comes to defense mergers and allow for big tie-ups of defense groups across Europe?
I don't think it's the Commission who's being like on the preventing a quicker integration or defragmentation. I would argue it's the national politics and talks about sovereignty and the supply chain sovereignty type of approach that can preclude most of the defragmentation.
Well, you wanted to hop in on that?
Yeah, just, I mean, three quick thoughts. I mean, the first one, really to stress that, yes, we can. There is no, the European industry masters 98% of defense technologies on its own. There are fantastic companies across the continent. Some of them, Indra, to quote a Spanish company, just won the entire market for redoing the FAA radar system in the United States. So that's a $500 million market that was won by a European company because they are better at doing this. So I'm not worried about our ability to deliver this from a tech perspective, and now we have the budget. But we need to move faster. The second thing is on this defragmentation. Of course, it's a complicated market. We have 27 different customers that are nation states, that are ministries of defense. So the pure logic of the single market is difficult to apply. It's not like let's have a single phone, service across the continent. It's, there are not 450 million customers of defense goods. And the politics of it, as described, are super important. But what is striking me is how fast things are moving. You look at something like the Czechoslovak group. That group hardly existed a couple of years ago. It was a series of local arsenals. It's now one of the biggest producers of ammunition and land equipment in the world. It has made its way in the top 100 companies in the world. It's in the top 10 in Europe. So we see lots of things happening, including in parts of Europe where we don't have the tradition of having super large defense industries. And I think it's very, very interesting to see that movement, and that will generate, I think, some interesting consolidation afterwards, sometimes combining old-fashioned primes with newcomers. As an example, Airbus just partnered with an Estonian company to do a drone killer. That seems to be a very interesting project.
Ukraine has, for understandable reasons, been reluctant to export weapons at a time of that it's fighting, but also the defense industry in Ukraine complains that the government doesn't have enough money to fully utilize its production capacity. Is there an answer to that? Is there some shift on the part of the government to allow more exports? Is that the way forward for the industry, or what's the best way to capitalize on the experience that you've gained, but also get the tech and the weapons that you need?
Yeah, we are moving forward, and now hopefully we will unblock this 90 billion loan, and 60 billion will be around 60.
The 90 billion that's stuck in there.
Yes.
Well, we'll see after the Hungarian election what happens with that.
So the logic is to spend during 2 years about 60 billion for defense. So it means that we will be able to get our industry busy. Also, we already discussed briefly SAFE. Ukrainian industry has a possibility to participate in the projects. So
As the same as any EU member country, you're on the same.
exactly.
Same.
So it will give an opening for Ukrainian industry. And also, we try to develop this policy build with Ukraine, meaning to create joint ventures, to build in Ukraine, in the EU, and indeed we need to create a very, very clear, let's say, algorithm how Ukrainian companies can do business outside Ukraine, and how the government is going to control this process. Because there is a risk that many companies will really shift on
There's been some worry of technology leakage outside of Ukraine, and then I guess as well for safety and other reasons of setting up production outside of Ukraine. But then what happens to the relationship with?
Exactly. We need to find a proper approach how, on one hand, to protect the interest of the companies, also of the government, because many of those products, they have been developed together in Ukrainian companies, EU companies, American companies, and the Ukrainian government. So, but I'm sure we will find a way out. Very short comment on Ukrainian housewives. So they're really doing a lot of things, inventing and building drones, fighting on the front line. But if we are serious, so what is important? That we can supply efficient weapons, and the discussion was what to do in the Gulf, how to protect the Gulf countries. We can produce efficient weapons and cheap weapons. And it's the first time in history that you have interceptors, which is cheaper when the missile or airplane. So in Ukraine, the interceptors now cost about 3,000–5,000, and you have very simple choice.
So even against the Shahid, which costs 30 to 50,000, you're still...
Exactly. Or you use Patriot missile, which costs 1 million, or even 10,000 drone or interceptor.
Super. We don't have very much time, unfortunately, on this panel, so I'm just going to ask a quick question of everybody. The poll also showed that while America is, the opinion towards America is shifting, there's overwhelming recognition that Russia is a threat. It's an enemy of the 6 European countries that were polled. Intelligence and military people have been warning that Russia will prepare to attack a NATO or EU member country very soon. Starting with Javi, are we aware and ready for that threat?
I think so. I think we are aware. Also, the public opinion shows that we are building a real European demos with this kind of awareness of the threats that we are facing. I think people is aware about the new geopolitical reality with Trump in the White House and what it means for Europe, and obviously Putin in the Kremlin with an explicit, direct threat to European democracy and European freedoms. But we have to adapt to the new reality. And the new reality means with this threat and with this uncertainty in the other side of the Atlantic, I would say, we need to take charge completely of our security. And this means to do one step in our sovereignty. This means European capabilities. This means more European defense. And not only that, also to learn better how to defend the European interest and to have a real strategic autonomy on security, on energy, on industry, that this will be the best protection that we can do. But the first step is the line that we have now, the front line that we have on Ukraine, because if Ukraine is able to win the war against Russia, it will be the best defense, possible defense that we can do for the future of the Europeans.
Thanks. Sevilla, you're sitting in Brussels. What's your assessment of how seriously Europe is treating the Russian threat, how ready it is for a potential Russian attack?
Well, the attitude definitely changed, and Europe is getting more and more serious. And what we just discussed, this readiness to invest, it's the best way to answer this threat. And I think we are capable if we join forces, because we know now exactly how to tackle this threat if we are talking about
with Ukraine's
Russia.
help. That
Exactly.
can happen.
Yes.
Camille, we ready? Not ready?
I think we are, and we're getting there. The one thing that struck me in your poll is that I think the people are sometimes more aware than at least some fractions of the political spectrum that continue to deny the Russia as a threat. And I think what is really important is how fast we move to put ourselves in a position of preventing the next crisis by having the right set of deterrence capabilities. And that is, just doing it and being able to demonstrate to the Russians that even if America stands aside or is not interested in the crisis for any reason, or is busy elsewhere, the Europeans can handle it.
Martin,
I think we're pretty aware of the fact, but I don't think that we assess enough the urgency and what it means, and how we should act then, and what should be our decisions. in terms of how quickly we need to move and how much we have to do before we get in a situation where the deterrence might not work, right? So, I mean, we have to do a lot very fast, and for that we need much more awareness than what we have now, even though the numbers are encouraging. But we see, in some of the polls that Globsec does, we see also other, approaches to this, because in some of the countries, Slovakia, but also Bulgaria, Russia is also seen as one of the true strategic partners, right? Which then creates different kind of decisions. So you try to build a relationship to prevent any kind of conflict, not deterrence, which might go counter the main flow.
It's flashing at me. Time out. We have to stop. I'm really sorry. That was a really good panel. Thanks very much. Next up, we'll dive into tech policy and the impact of AI on society. We're going to do a quick stage change, and then my colleague Max Guerrero will moderate a discussion about the results of, after de Bartlett's Paloma Torres shares some analysis of the European poll results on tech policy. Thanks again for taking part in our panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.